Have you ever struggled with colouring hair when working on your portrait pages? Well, today I am going to walk you through my process for colouring hair in this step-by-step beginner-friendly tutorial so you can gain more confidence in tackling hair on your colouring pages. Hey guys, welcome back to my Colourful Country Life with me, Karron. I am back today with a hair tutorial for you all, and I'm going to be working on two examples using Prismacolor pencils. The first one is a beautiful strawberry blonde in Wondrous Folk here by Christine Karron. Now, I'm going to be showing you how I achieve this look here using a flick technique. So this is my preferred technique for colouring hair in grayscale books like this one, and also on portrait pages where the illustrator has kind of just given us an outline of hair. Then, next up, I'm also going to show you how I created this golden brown hair, and this is from Seasons by Hanna Karlzon, this book here. So I use a slightly altered technique when I'm colouring hair in Hannah's books, and that's because of the lines that she adds to her hair into her illustrations. But I will discuss that in more detail later in the video. So there are many different ways to colour hair, but these are my two most common go-to methods. I do colour hair differently if I'm using alcohol markers, and I will show you an example. Also, if I'm colouring a very small portrait, or if I'm after a less realistic look, then I'm just going to use a straight blend. But this is a page I coloured using alcohol markers only for the hair. That's 3 different markers. It was actually the Spectrum Art Tri blends. Also in this book, I'll show you, that's another page I created with some blonde hair using the flick technique. That, I believe, is a colour along up on the channel. So this is Rose and Her Friends, if you're looking for that colour along. Actually, I can probably tag it down below. Also, if we go back to Christine Karron's Wildflower Folk, and this page is also a colour along up on the channel. And there's another blonde created using the flick technique with Prismacolor pencils. So when we're colouring hair, we're not just trying to colour in the shape, we're trying to create depth and shine and texture. So here are some of my go-to tips for choosing hair colours. So number 1, think in terms of 3 or more shades, a light, a mid-tone and a dark. This is going to help you create dimension. Using only 1 or 2 colours will almost always make hair look flat. Number 2, pay attention to your undertones. Blonde hair is not just yellow, it might have gold, copper or even ash undertones. Brown hair can lean warm with red or golden tones or cool with ash tones. In reality, our hair usually has a warm, cool or neutral undertone. Now this is something to consider as part of your overall colour palette for your page. If you've watched my How to Colour Skin tutorial, I do talk in depth about skin undertones. So if you colour your hair first, that can influence the skin tone that will suit your page best, and vice versa. Colouring skin tone first can influence what hair colour will look best on your portrait, and I will talk about that a little bit more in detail later on. Now, tip number 3, consider your light source. The brightest parts of the hair should be where the light naturally hits. That's where your lightest colours will go. If you are new to colouring hair, one of the easiest ways to learn where to place your shadows and highlights is by using a grayscale colouring book. And I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to show you a few examples of what I'm talking about using Christine Karron's book. So whatever part of the hair is closest to the light is going to be your highlight. So we've got this section here. So if you think of the fringe, it's going to have like a little bit of a curve. So therefore our highlight is around here. And when we look at our curls here, you can see the highlight is in the top here and here, and along the top here as well, and here, because that's what's going to be hitting the light first. And I'll show you a few more examples of this. Let's find one with lots of hair. Okay, so we've got the moon here, and you can see the lights hitting. So this is our light source coming down this way. So anything that is hitting the light first from this section is going to be where your highlight is. And you can see here it is left blank. So your highlight areas are left blank, and your darkest shadows will go in the darkest shading that Christine has put down. So here we go. So you can see light is hitting here. So it looks like the light is coming from this end because we're a little bit darker on this side. And even with the braids here, so here and here, these two ends of the plait or the braid, it's going to be overlapping the other piece of hair. So the ends are darker and the center is going to be a little bit curved. So that is where the highlight is hitting. Yeah, here we go. We've got more light here shining on the curve across the fringe, and we've got a curve down here and across here. So that is something to look out for. But like I said, grayscale books, that's dirty. Grayscale books will already have that in there for you. So that's a great way to learn where you should be putting your highlights and your shadows. You can also look up reference photos. So you could just look on Pinterest for a front facing portrait and then just explain where you want the light to hit. So if the light's coming from above, from the left, the right, front on, or up even from the bottom. Yeah. So we've got all our spaces here for our highlights and here for our shadows. Okay, so my last tip number 4, is to avoid using black for shadows. So using black for shadows can make the hair look a bit flat. If colouring black hair, depending on the shade of hair you want to achieve, the shade of black you want to achieve, try adding some either deep reds or deep blues into your shadows. You can even use some sort of purple tones as well. You can still use black, but use a deep warm or a deep cool colour to complement the undertones to keep the colour combo from falling flat. So another example, for red hair, you could use a deep burgundy shadow. You could even use a really deep, like an indigo blue. Today you're going to see me using sepia and dark umber as my darker shades. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I am using Prismacolor pencils in both examples today because they are my most often used pencil brand. I love their softness, I love their colour range, I love the rich pigments. But I'll be honest, they're not always the best for hair because that softness means the point wears down quickly. That's why many colorists prefer polychromos or other harder core pencils for this technique. The sharper, longer lasting point makes it easier to create fine details and defined individual strands without having to sharpen your pencils constantly. That said, you can get beautiful results with Prismacolor pencils. You may just need to sharpen more often than you would with the polychromos. That is with my first technique, but with the second technique that I'm going to show you in Hanna Karlzon's books, it is not such a huge issue. But before we get started in the book, I do want to explain and show you a close-up of the flicking technique I've been talking about. And I'm also going to show you how I keep a sharp point on my Prismas for as long as possible, which is something I do get asked about often. But first, let's have a look at the flicking technique. So I've just got some blank paper here. Just going to fold it in half. And let's grab a pencil. I'm going to use sepia, but let's just sharpen it. So I'm using my Dial 133 as usual to sharpen. Okay, now we have a nice sharp point there. Now I hold my pencil on an angle, and just a tip here, the further back you hold your pencil, the lighter pressure you can get, and if you want a firmer pressure, hold the pencil closer to the tip. Now I'm going to press the tip to the paper like this, and this is with a medium pressure. If you press too hard, you're going to end up looking like you've just drawn lines onto your colouring page. And the trick with hair is layers. You want to build up your colour. Now, if you press too hard or too light, you will lose the texture we're trying to create. So medium pressure, tip to paper, then lift off as you pull the pencil outwards like that. So think about it if you're doing the tail end of a tick. So you do a tick like that. So you just want the tail part though. Okay, so we're just going to put the tip down and pull out. Just like that. Okay, and don't worry too much about the length. You can make them longer by drawing your hand back slower. or you can do it quicker and do short ones. Okay, so another tip is to make sure you are flicking in the direction the hair flows. So if you have straight hair, you're flicking in a straight line. But if your hair is curving, whether the hair has a curl in it or it's a braid, a plait, a bun, any type of hairstyle, you're going to want to curve your flick. So you can flick it upwards or flick it downwards. So just like do that to flick up, that to flick down. And this comes in handy when you're doing eyelashes as well, because eyelashes aren't dead straight. So you're going to flick it to the side to add a little curl, like a bit of a C motion. Yep. And then you're going to flick it in the other direction too. Okay. Now, how I keep a sharp point for as long as I can. I have mentioned this before, but what I do is I actually turn my pencil as I go. And you will see me doing this in all of my videos. If you just watch the writing on the pencil as I'm coloring, it doesn't matter if I'm doing a straight blend, layering, scumbling, flicking, I am consistently turning my pencil. And the second you feel one side getting flat, just turn it. It's muscle memory to me at this point, but if you're not doing this with your pencils, especially your softer pencils like your Prismas, I highly recommend trying it, and you'll have to sharpen them less often. So just watch, I'll show you now, watch the writing on the pencil. So whether I'm just doing a normal blend like this, or if I'm flicking, you'll see the pencil turning. Okay. And that helps you keep a sharp point. So let's start coloring some hair. So let's start in Wondrous Folk by Christine Karron, and the colour combination I'm using to create this strawberry blonde look today is PC 947 Dark Umber, PC 944 Terracotta, PC 1032 Pumpkin Orange, PC 940 Sand, and PC 914 Cream. The first thing I do when colouring hair is lay down a light base layer using my lightest colour in the combination, and in this case I'm covering the whole head of hair with PC 914 Cream. And I do this for a couple of reasons. First, it works the same way as when we colour skin. It gives us a soft, even foundation to work over, and I do discuss this in my How to Colour Skin for Beginners video, which I will link in the eye at the top of the screen. And second, when we're flicking in our darker strands later, there will always be tiny spaces in between the strokes. So having this light colour underneath means those gaps are filled with a natural tone that's already part of the hair colour, rather than the stark white of the paper. That makes the hair look fuller, more realistic, and it keeps the highlights looking intentional rather than patchy. And I do have a video on layering techniques where I show you how I layer my colours to create gold. I use the same basic idea for colouring skin and also for hair, even though the type of pencil strokes used are different, with flicking instead of scumbling. If you are unsure what scumbling is, actually I do discuss and demonstrate that technique in my blending for beginners video. And one thing with working on a grayscale portrait is that we don't have to think too hard about where to place our shadows and highlights, because it's already marked out for us. You can see here there's a highlight area like a halo or a band created around the top of the head, situated in the center of the fringe area where the curve of the hair curves out, hitting the light, and you can also see it on some of the curls too. Now, although I did describe the highlight around the top of the head as a halo, you can see it's not a perfectly uniform band. Highlights in hair are rarely a single uninterrupted section. The natural flow of strands means lighter areas will break, curve, and overlap with darker ones. This variation is what gives your hair realism and depth, and in our next demonstration in Hanna's book, you'll notice how I've shaped the highlight so it follows the form of the hair, allowing for subtle breaks rather than having one continuous highlight area. So I'm layering my colours from light to dark here using a medium pressure,
And our second colour is Prismacolor 940 Sand. With this shade, I'm flicking right down into the start of the highlight area. Think of those fringe sections as being split into two halves, with the very centre acting as the highlight. So for the top half, bring this colour down roughly 3/4 of the way towards the centre, but leave a strip of untouched paper in the middle. That's going to be your brightest highlight. Don't think too much about your strand placement. It's going to look more real if you're randomly placing your strands. Also, avoid ending all of your flicks at the same point. So in nature, hair lengths vary, and this variation breaks up any uniform lines that could make the hair look flat or artificial. So by making some flicks longer and others shorter, you not only add visual interest but also gently break into the highlight area. So you're softening that transition so it feels natural rather than sharply defined. When I get to the ends of the hair, I like to flick upwards into the highlight. This allows the soft tapered end of the flick to land right where the lightest part of the hair is. So it keeps that area soft and natural. However, if the ends of the hair are made up of finer strands, I will also flick back down towards the tips of the hair. So I usually start this downward flick from about halfway along my last upward flick, so just before it starts to taper off. That way I can create a neat, sharp ending to the strand. So this two-way flicking means the ends look more realistic, the upward flick blends into the highlight smoothly, while the downward flick defines the tips so they don't disappear. You'll see me do this more often when I'm working with the darker colours in the combination, as that's when I want those tips to have a nice crisp finish. Now I'm moving into pumpkin orange. This is where we start shifting from a yellow tone into our mid-tones to build up some depth of colour using that touch of copper. So by layering the pumpkin orange over this yellow toned base, it blends smoothly and it creates that natural transition you often see in strawberry blonde hair between the highlights and the shadows. The roots and shadowed areas take on a richer, warmer hue, while the lighter sections will keep their golden hue. And it's important to build this gradually so the orange doesn't end up overpowering the highlights, but instead it complements the yellow tone so you get that seamless, realistic shift in colour. This time, I'm not taking the pumpkin orange quite as far as the sand. I want to leave some of that lighter base showing through. I'm mainly following the grayscale shadow areas that are already in the artwork and covering these sections with a light layer of pumpkin orange. So at this stage, it's still all about colour placement. We're mapping out where the shadows and highlights will sit before we start building more depth. So by putting down a light layer now, we give ourselves room to adjust later. We can deepen shadows, warm up or cool down the tone, refine transitions until we get the exact strawberry blonde shade that we're looking for. Think of it as sketching with colour. We're creating the structure now so the later layers can bring it to life. And if you feel like you've taken your colour too far into the highlight or you've added more shading than you wanted, Prismacolors do erase surprisingly well at this stage, especially with just one light layer. So you can easily pull that highlight back if you need to. Now moving on to our second last colour, which is Terracotta. This shade is really important for building that warm, natural depth in strawberry blonde hair. It bridges the gap between the brighter orange tones and then the deeper shadows, helping to create that soft copper warmth. In terms of colour placement, I'm focusing mainly on the heavily shaded areas to push that depth a bit further. So my flicks are still random in direction and length, and that is intentional. Some of those longer flicks will carry the terracotta into the lighter areas, which does help break up the highlight and keep the hair looking natural. So in real hair, individual strands don't all stop and start in nice neat lines, so a bit of controlled randomness actually makes the end result more realistic. Next, I'm going in with our darkest shadow shade, which is the dark umber, and I'm using this sparingly just in the very darkest areas of the hair. These strokes are a little bit shorter while still random. Remember, your flicks should all end in different sections so they're not all uniform and in alignment. This is going to create a more realistic look. Now I'm coming back in with sand. The idea here is to reintroduce that soft blonde tone into any areas where it may have been dulled or covered over as we layered. I'm using it to lightly fill in any small gaps between the strands as well, so if there's white paper peeking through or if the transition between colours feels a bit harsh, this will help soften it. And because sand is one of our lighter midtones, it blends beautifully into both the highlight and the warmer copper shades that we've already laid down as well. So this extra pass over, this extra layer, ensures the blonde tones remain visible in the finished hair and keeps the colour transitions looking seamless before we commit to our darkest shadows again. Next, I'm going back in with pumpkin orange. At this stage, it's about reinforcing those warm coppery tones into those mid shadow areas and deepening the transition between the lighter blonde and also the terracotta tones. So I'm still keeping my flicks random, varied in length, so the warmth blends naturally into the surrounding colors without forming any harsh bands of colors. Then I return to Terracotta. This is what I call my bridging colour. It ties the warmth of the pumpkin orange to the depth of the dark umber that we're about to go back in with. Now I'm placing it over the shaded areas to build up that richness and to make sure the darkest tones don't look too heavy against the lighter sections. So it's going to transition the two colours really nicely. Now I'm going back in with our darkest shade again, which is dark umber, and I am concentrating this only in the deepest shadow areas where I want the most contrast. So this is what really makes the lighter strands pop. It gives the hair a sense of shape, a sense of depth, and then once that's in place, I'm going to go back to sand. So this next layer of sand is to pull all those colors together to create a seamless transition into the highlight areas. And it's also going to make sure the tooth of the paper is completely covered so no white is showing through. And now going back in with a layer of cream only over the highlight area, just to bring back that brightness and to ensure our highlight area it's not getting lost or looking washed out against those mid-tones. It's at this point that I start to assess the overall look of the hair, and in this case I did decide to bring pumpkin orange back into parts of the highlight just to infuse a little warmth and stop the blonde from looking too pale. I'm still using random flicking motions with a medium pressure here so the warmth is blending in nice and naturally. And then finally I take sand over those sections again, softening the transition from the pumpkin orange into the cream so the highlight has a smooth glowing finish. And that is the finished strawberry blonde look for this page. I usually work with around 2 full layers of colour. That is just a general guide though. If I feel a section needs more depth or warmth or brightness, I will happily go back in and add extra layers until I'm happy with the result. The important thing is to keep assessing the hair as you go. Hair colouring is really about balance. Too little layering can make it look flat. Overlayering, you can lose your highlights. So by building gradually and checking your progress, you can stop at the point where the hair has both depth and shine. Okay, now that we have this one complete, let's move over to Seasons by Hanna Karlzon, where we will tackle a rich golden brown using an altered flick technique. So for this golden brown hair colour, I'm going to be using a combination of PC948 Sepia, PC1082 Chocolate, PC943 Burnt Ochre, and PC997 Beige. And like in the first demonstration, I am starting by layering a soft layer of the lightest colour, which in this case is beige, and I'm also going to be layering from light to dark with my colours yet again. Now, I did mention earlier that I use an altered version of the flicking technique in Hanna Karlzon's books, and also that I'm not too concerned with having a sharp point on my pencils here either. Because of the lines Hanna has through her hair illustrations, it is harder to get a realistic look without manipulating the image in some way. So the aim here is for a softer version of the flicking technique that doesn't create as much definition or attention on individual strands. So the first thing you'll see me do before I start adding any other colours is try to work out the light source and where the light is hitting the hair. I'm also trying to figure out if some of these waves are concave or convex, and once I've decided on a course of action, I will start with our second lightest colour, which will be Burnt Ochre. And if you're unsure where to place your highlights or shadows, there are a few things you can do. These are some of the tips I did share in my how to color skin video as well. So first, look up some portrait reference photos with the light coming from different directions. Second, try shining a light on yourself in a mirror from the direction that you're considering having your light source come from. And third, if you have any grayscale coloring books, flip through to see if you can find a portrait which is in a similar position to the one you're coloring, and use that as a guide for your light source and where to place your shadows and your highlights. And here I am trying to remember where my light source is coming from based on how I coloured the skin, and also looking at the waves here, trying to work out where I'm going to be putting my highlight in her hair. Now with the burnt ochre, I am placing it in the same way that I did the colours from the strawberry blonde demonstration. So I'm flicking it into the highlight area but not covering it completely. I'm also working with a soft pressure here, so softer than I did in the first demonstration, because I don't want any harsh edges to my flicks. I don't want any defined strands really. So where the hair meets the edge of the book, I will sometimes scumble the colour in small circles and then flick outwards instead of just using the flicking motion. So this stops you getting blunt, cut off lines at the end of the page, and it makes your transition more seamless. I'll also use this same scumbling and flicking technique when shading the middle of the strand. So I'll softly fill the center of the shadow area and I'll flick outwards towards the highlight. So sometimes upwards to one highlight and then sometimes downwards to another. So sometimes both. These flicks are softer, they're more subtle, and for this golden brown hair color, the placement is the same as in the strawberry blonde combination, just with less focus on creating those individual strands. So this is why having a sharp pencil doesn't matter so much here. This look will be more blended overall and not as hyper realistic as the previous technique. And I also leave a slightly higher highlight area, slightly larger highlight area here. That's just my personal preference for this type of illustration, but you can absolutely bring the color further into the highlight if you like, and if you're looking for a more realistic look. Next is chocolate, which I'm using to start building depth into those shadow areas. I'm still using random flicks here so the strands don't look too uniform, and also with a soft pressure. And after that, I'm actually going to go back in with our lightest color, our highlight, which is beige. And this is where the two techniques differ in ways as well. So the reason for this step is to soften the edges of both the chocolate and the burnt ochre. And with this lightest color, I'm actually using a medium pressure now. So firmer than what I used with the darker colors. So those flick edges from the chocolate and the burnt ochre actually blend a bit smoothly. And now it is time for our darkest shade, which is sepia. This cools down those golden tones slightly and adds more contrast to the deeper shadow areas. So once that is in, I will then return to chocolate to deepen the shadows further, and I'm going to begin covering more of the paper's tooth. So we've gone from light to dark, and we're now going to start going from dark to light in our second layer. And now we're back to burnt ochre again, flicking randomly into those highlight areas to warm them up and create more of that natural variation that we need. And now I'm going to return to our highlight color, which is beige, and this time I'm going to cover the entire highlight area using a firmer pressure to blend everything together to make sure the paper's white is completely covered, and also to make sure that there's no harsh flick lines. If there is, I'm going to try and blend them out a little bit too. And so far that is 2 layers that we've put down. So it's at this point in time that I reassess, I have a look at my colouring page, does it need any warmth, any shadows, any brightening, anything like that, and I have decided to go back in with sepia again, just in case any of the shadows have dulled during that blending process. And then finally I'm going to add a little more of the burnt ochre just into the highlight, just to tie all those tones together a bit better. And that's how I colour hair in Hanna Karlzon's books. Now, you can use this golden brown combination in your grayscale books like we did earlier, so you could use it in Wondrous Folk and use the method that I showed you in Wondrous Folk, and vice versa. You could take that strawberry blonde combination and use it with this Hanna Karlzon method. So this is softer, a little bit more blended than the strawberry blonde technique, but still with plenty of depth and natural flow to the hair as well. So that brings us to the end of today's hair colouring tutorial. We've explored two different takes on the flick technique, with a strawberry blonde in Wondrous Folk and a softer golden brown in Seasons. Even though the basic method is the same, the choice of colours, the way we layer them, how much emphasis we put on individual strands versus blended sections can completely change the look and feel of the hair. If you'd like to recreate any of the looks that we covered today, feel free to take note of the colour combinations that I've used. We have the strawberry blonde and the golden brown we worked through step by step. I'll also pop up the blonde hair combination I showed earlier on in the video, and that way you'll have 3 complete combinations: a blonde, a golden brown and a strawberry blonde ready to try on your own pages. Now remember, the number of layers I used today is just a guide. I do try to get things done in 2 layers because I don't like layering. The quicker I can get things done, the better. So I try for 2, but you may find you need more. Sometimes I need more, or sometimes you may need less, depending on the paper you're using, the pencils you're using, and also the final effect that you want. So the key is to work gradually, keep your flicks flowing with the natural flow of the hair, and don't be afraid to adjust as you go. So adding in any extra warmth, deepening shadows, or brightening highlights until you're happy with the result. I hope this demonstration has given you ideas and even the confidence to try this technique on your own colouring portrait pages. If you do give it a go, I would love to see your work, so tag me. You can tag me over on Instagram, Facebook, or you can actually post here on my community tab too, so I can check out your beautiful work. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Happy colouring, take care, and bye for now. And here's a look at the completed pages. I love how they both turned out, and I hope you like them too. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.